I wanted to go back to the final presidential debate when Obama discussed why he was opposed to the free trade agreement with Colombia.
History in Colombia right now is that labor leaders have been targeted for assassination on a fairly consistent basis, and there have not been prosecutions. And what I have said, because the free trade, the trade agreement itself does have labor and environmental protections, but we have to stand for human rights, and we have to make sure that violence isn't being perpetrated against workers who are just trying to organize for their rights. Which is why, for example, I supported the Peruvian free trade agreement, which was a well-structured agreement.
Mario, your response to, well, then it was the presidential nominee, now the president-elect, Barack Obama, explaining both why he supports Colombia free trade, opposes it, and supports Peru.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people welcome that. A lot of people here in Colombia, when they heard Barack Obama say that, and obviously the fact that Colombia was mentioned in the last presidential debate, it was welcomed here, particularly from the trade union movement and the popular movement. President Uribe, the best friend in the hemisphere of President Bush, immediately tried to counterbalance that by saying, well, we've done a lot to improve the conditions here for trade unionists. The fact of the matter is that in 2008 alone, 41 trade unionists have been killed. Since Uribe took office 6 years ago, 454 trade unionists have been killed. Last year, 39 were killed, which was more than all the other countries in the world combined. So if these are improvements, certainly there's still a long way to go. And Barack Obama certainly pointed that out. The concern that some people have here, and it comes in the context of what's happening on a national scale right now, massive mobilization of indigenous, peasant, Afro-Colombian, the women's movement, student groups, and, of course, the trade union movement as well, are mobilizing, and it started over a month ago on October 11th, and they're marching all the way from Cali and different parts of the country. They'll be arriving in Bogota, the capital, next week, and they're calling attention to not only the question of the trade union movement being targeted under the Uribe administration, thereby negating the idea of a U.S. free trade agreement with Colombia, but they're also pointing to the fact that 1,200 indigenous activists have been killed over the 6 years since Uribe has been in office. Over 400,000 indigenous communities have been displaced, and there's a whole litany of human rights concerns, the most recent being the controversy around the false positives, the murder of innocent civilians, taken out of poor neighborhoods in different parts of Colombia, executed on the spot by Colombian army officers, and then dressed up as guerrillas and presented as if they were combat deaths to show that they're making progress in the war against quote-unquote terrorism. This is finally becoming public, and it's a major scandal here in Colombia. And I think what human rights activists, the trade union movement, the progressive sectors here in Colombia are hoping will happen is that Barack Obama will begin to talk about those issues as well, not simply hinging it on the disastrous record against trade union activists here in Colombia.
And Mark Brenner, your response to the whole issue from labor's perspective of these free trade agreements with Colombia and other Latin American countries, there was concern during the presidential race, especially during the primaries, as to how strongly Barack Obama would press for changes in these free trade agreements?
Well, I think everybody needs to be worried about what an Obama administration is going to do around free trade. We saw this with the Clinton administration. They became the biggest partisans of free trade out there, passing NAFTA and bringing us a host of other bilateral agreements. I think that we need to keep the pressure on to actually make sure that we get what we need in the way of economic and international rules of the game that can work for workers both here and in countries like Colombia. No question.
Mario, before you go, I did want to ask you overall about the reaction in Colombia on Tuesday night to the election of Barack Obama.
The reaction was very positive. I was actually in southern Colombia, in Cauca, actually accompanying the indigenous communities as they were starting their march up to Bogota, and we were watching the returns, and the people were amazed at seeing the victory of Barack Obama. They're not naive to think that it's going to be a complete transformation in terms of relations between Colombia and the United States, but there is a sense of hope. One of the things that was raised, and I should draw attention to the viewers and listeners of Democracy Now!, is the concern about the potential Attorney General choice There's been talk about a close ally and friend of Obama as a potential Attorney General for the United States, Eric Holder, who is currently defending Chiquita Brand International in its defense against dozens of plaintiffs here in Colombia, working families who are targeted by paramilitaries who are funded to the tune of $1.7 million over the last several years. It's a major scandal, and if this guy becomes the Attorney General under an Obama administration, it's going to be really hard to find justice in this case coming from the United States.
Mark Brenner, I wanted to ask you about a new report out from Public Citizen. It says trade issues played unprecedented nationwide role in congressional presidential races, reinforcing public demand for new globalization rules. And the figures that they use here are very interesting. From the presidency to the House to the Senate, it says that more than at least 30 fair trade supporters, according to this new report, have both houses have increased by more than 30 seats who are opposed to free trade for so-called free trade for fair trade.
Well, I mean, this has been an issue that's been, the paradox has been there forever, that most people are absolutely sick and tired of the kinds of economic regime they live under with free trade, and they want their politicians to act accordingly. But that's not been what people have done in Washington, and I don't, you know, this is a hopeful sign, the report you cite, but there's no guarantee there unless people are actually able to hold their elected officials accountable, and that's the missing piece in all of this, is how we actually move to do that under this new administration.
To be exact, as I go through this report, it says a total of 33 new fair traders won seats in the House of Representatives, which represents a net change of 26. 4 new fair trade supporters won Senate seats, net change of 4.
Encouraging.
Final word on the auto bailout, how you see this playing out right now, how you see it going to happen.
Well, if I get the last word on that, the thing I've got to mention is healthcare, because, look, GM spends over $5 billion a year on healthcare. They are responsible for over 1 million people's healthcare, both currently and then eventually through the VIBA that they will fund. That's where it seems to me we've got to be sort of pointing our fire and sort of looking for solutions, because no surprise, the auto industry is not talking about a national health insurance plan or anything like the kind of nationalization of the health care in the auto industry that we saw after 9/11 for rescue workers here in New York and other examples like that. So it seems to me that's got to be one of the places where labor focuses first and foremost, and where hopefully other activists around the country are also turning.
I want to thank you both for being with us. Mario in Colombia, Mario Murillo, professor of communications at Hofstra University, author of the book Colombia in the United States, War, Terrorism, and Destabilization, and Mark Brenner, director of Labor Notes, the largest circulation cross-union national publication in the country. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. When we come back, we're going to look at the 3